Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
So I'll start us off.
I'm Daniel.
I'm Michael.
I'm Marty.
I'm Jerry.
I'm John.
I'm Ricardo.
My name is Todd Horn.
I'm Mark.
I'm Jim.
My name is Sean Clark. I'm Avery.
My name is Ray Dyer. I'm Jerry. I'm Tom Bruein.
I'm Richard Aslini. My name is Michael.
I'm Jay Davidson.
My name is Harley Shapiro.
I'm Lee Robbins.
My name is Roy.
Ian.
My name is Cass.
I'm Kane Matsuda.
I'm Lenny.
I'm Tom Rivas.
My name is George Gibbs.
Anybody joining us for the first time? Or after a long absence? We're all old timers, okay. So our Dharma Duo today, I'm going to let them introduce themselves, how they wish, are Eric Anderson and Oswaldo Garcia.
All right, thank you.
Hello. Morning. It's very interesting being on this side of the room the first time. As some of you know, I'm a professor and I'm usually not shy about speaking to groups, but it's a different topic than I'm used to, so I have a little bit of nervousness about that.
I would like to just thank you for having me be able to speak to you all today. And it's been an interesting process of just sort of like sitting down and working with Oswaldo to talk about what we're going to say and what I want to reveal about myself and who we are. That sort of thing. So.
Yeah, so we both have heard some of the previous Dharma Duo talks, and the tradition has been for one person to speak for about a half hour and the other person to take over after that. So we wanted to break the mold a little bit, and what we did is we have 5 general topics or so that we'd like to talk, and maybe to try to do a conversation rather than a lecture one by one, and either a mutual interview, a conversation, inviting everybody also to maybe ask questions along the way, if that's fine with everybody. The first topic, when we were approached about doing the Dharma Duo, it's like, particularly for me individually, what do I have to teach anybody? I can talk about meteorology, but I'm certainly not in a position to talk about Buddhist principles to people that are way more knowledgeable than I am. But I was reassured that one of the main things that we should be talking about here is why do we come to be at this particular place, and of course what's the life trajectory that took us there. So let me start going and then bounce it back to Eric and back and forth. I'm 64. I was born in Cuba in 1947. It's a whole different universe from what I'm encountering right now. It's interesting. I was just recently got National Geographic Online. KQED was doing their usual fundraiser, and one of the comments was like, every issue of National Geographic from the 1888 is available. So I looked up Cuba, and there was one from 1947, and it was really interesting to see the Cuba that I was born into, pre-revolutionary Cuba. It's a beautiful place, as most people know, a very interesting place culturally. Of course, it went through the major, the revolution that happened in '59. So as a kid, I grew up into a whole different world, a big family, no idea that I would end up in a whole different place with a different culture and a different language. very macho society, very homophobic. So growing up, the whole idea of gay people was a very stereotyped and very negative one. At around age 11 through 13, the revolution happened. We left everything behind. We didn't come in a boat. It was actually a Pan Am flight, but we left everything behind. And for me, actually, it was a big adventure. It was for my parents, of course, they lost everything, so I grew up with. Luckily, we left Miami early on, and also one of the things that was really useful or greatly helpful for me was that my parents were very open-minded and loving people. And my father in particular was a pretty liberal bent, so he resisted what the normal reaction of the Cuban exile community was to be anything that was perceived to be anti-Castro was supposed to be good. So Republicans were good, Democrats were bad, and that's affected our world history because that probably got us George W. Bush elected in the year 2000, or selected, I'm going to say, by the Supreme Court. But anyway, that was a major aspect of my life. Then, of course, the coming out process as a teenager in New York was not a very easy one. I felt very isolated. But then again, it was part of my generation. People that are my age started coming out before the gay movement got going. And 69 was I was 22 years old when Stonewall happened. So it was many years after that I began coming into my own as a gay man, or reconciling myself to being gay and embracing that. And that happened in my late 20s. That brought me to San Francisco eventually, after bouncing around the West. But again, as with everybody of my generation that's gay, I lost dozens of friends to the AIDS crisis, including a partner that I came to be to San Francisco with. So that was certainly one of the areas of my life that made a huge impact. Erica.
Great. Well, I'm 57 years old. I was born in St. Louis, Missouri, and didn't have quite the upheaval of being that Oswaldo talks about, but grew up in a fairly conservative family. My mother had some money growing up, and so she had horses, and so we were sort of raised with everything. Basically, we had everything we needed. The shoes, the clothing, and all of those things were provided adequately, more than adequately. And but I had parents that were pretty conservative and strict, and so suffered from the consequences of that. I basically, as a kid, I was kind of fairly lonely, fairly isolated. I had brothers, but didn't really feel comfortable with them, or there's a lot of tension growing up. It seemed like a lot of conflict, arguing. And so I feel like I had, suffered from that in a fairly early age. So I lived in St. Louis. I basically went to university. I studied computer science, electrical engineering. As soon as I had the opportunity to leave St. Louis for a job, I took it and went to the East Coast. And lived on the East Coast for a couple of years. I lived in both New Jersey and then moved up to the Boston area. And basically, it was right around the move from New Jersey up to the Boston area that I decided to come out, or I basically, it was a struggle for me because I sort of really didn't know how to navigate the waters, and luckily I met somebody at my job, at my work, and he took me by the hand, as they say, and so that was right as I was moving into the Boston area, and so Boston became my coming out town, I guess, as it were, and and that was right around 23. And it was pretty wild times for me. A lot of drinking, a lot of acting out. Just 6 nights a week, I was basically out hitting the bars and trying to get sow my oats and all that. And lived on the West Coast or the East Coast for about 4 or 5 years, and then had the opportunity to move to the West Coast, and took it and ended up living here in California. Basically, my story is one of moving around quite a bit. And I lived in both Los Angeles area, the Bay Area, and then in Portland, Oregon. And I had an amazing opportunity to live in the Big Sur area and study massage at Esalen. So it was one of the major sorts of benefits of being here on the West Coast. Just many trials and tribulations of dealing with alcoholism and getting sober, and basically coming to terms with who I am. I'm still doing that. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here.
Yeah, one of the things, of course, we hear in this room all the time, just about every speaker touches on dukkha, suffering, and of course, my understanding of one of the mainstays of the Buddha is that he teaches about suffering and the end of suffering. In thinking about what I was going to be saying today and what I was going to be talking about, it's what was it that brought me here as far as my spiritual development and so forth. Going back to my early childhood, one of the blessings I think that I have with my family is that most people would think that Cubans are Latin are Catholic, and the religion is a very important part of things. And my observation of Cubans as a whole, certainly my family, is that Catholicism is a real surface kind of practice. My father in particular went to Catholic school, had very bad experiences in Catholic school, so that his children would never have to suffer through the kind of dogmatism that he was exposed to. So I grew up in a totally lay environment. He went to church only for weddings or baptisms, I suppose. So when I was in 7th grade, I was in a private school. I mean, not a fancy private school, but we had a middle-class existence. And my classmates are age 7 or 8, whatever it is, you take First Communion. We're having First Communion. And I was really coveting the fact that they had this beautiful gilt-edged little prayer book with pictures of kids going on, little angels going up to heaven to Jesus on a stairway and all of that. And I wanted to have one of those. That was my motivation for becoming baptized. Having First Communion. I wanted to have First Communion, but I was told that in order to do that, you had to be baptized. So I approached my father. It's like, I want to be baptized. And, he was pretty fine with that. I said, okay, go ahead, let's do it. And so I got to pick my parents that got baptized. I got to go to First Communion, got my little book. So that was, I did have communion a second time, but after that, that was the end of my Catholicism. I think, hearing some of the stories that I've heard over here, it has been a blessing for that one. But that didn't mean that I was not interested in spiritual pursuits. And there was one event that I remember very distinctly, especially in preparation for this talk. I was about 8, around the time that I was, I suppose that I was trying to do the First Communion business, but I remember riding in the back seat of the car, and my parents in the front. I don't know where my older sister was. I know that was the only one in the back, and I had this, for lack of a better word, a real profound spiritual event that I could not explain in my own words. I was incapable of putting those into words, but I just burst into tears. All I remember about it, and it was a very distinct memory, is that how lucky I was to be born into my family, having parents that were loving and having a secure existence at that point. It's something that stuck with me for a long time. And then even before, clearly after I was already gay and very closeted, in graduate school I began going through reading stuff, so I have for many years now, probably 30 plus years, been an avid reader of Buddhist books. I have a fairly extensive library, but I've never really been, for many years, other than just an intellectual reader of ideas. So there's any number of authors that have heard mentioned over here that I keep on reading. Some of the recent ones are Philip Moffat that I heard you talk about, and I have many others, from Sylvia Boorstein to some of the Tibetan Buddhist books, and they have provided me comfort and ideas along the way, but very little in the way. I mean, I have done very little in the way of practice, and that's one of the reasons that I came to the sangha during one of the, especially after the death of my partner back in '95, and followed by the death of my mother back in New Jersey a couple of years later. I was at that point it was a pretty low point in my life, and that's when in therapy, so the therapist suggested meditation, and that's when I began doing a little bit of that. So very good.
I would say I got exposed to Buddhism. My grandmother had a little Buddhist sculpture that she kept in the bathroom, and every time I'd use the bathroom, I got to see it, and of all things. And then a couple of times I was photographed sitting like the Buddha, so I would try to copy that pose. And it's interesting how we get exposed to just ideas, and so it came from that little figurine that my grandmother had. And I would say that I sort of came to this practice via yoga and the opportunity to sit during yoga and meditate and be quiet for a few minutes. And so for me, that was the doorway to come here and to the Buddhist practice, was through the act of sitting and meditating. And it's still a very strong draw for me. I still get great satisfaction and refuge by sitting. When my brain is running 1,000 miles an hour, I will find a cushion or find a chair to sit in and meditate. And so that's kind of how I got here. It's interesting, these little moments, like you said, that Oswaldo, where you just have these moments of enlightenment. And I had one of those experiences where I was feeling particularly alone, and I was sitting on a dock at the edge of a lake, and I had this little bird, this swan or something, sort of paddle across the lake, and basically came and found me, and sat in front of me in the water, and I was like, that was one of those moments where I just felt like, I'm not alone. And I've had other experiences where, you really get that life has this amazing grace to it and beauty, and that I get to play a part in it somehow, and that I'm here and that I'm alive. I was just earlier today, I was just sitting and watching just the people and the little girls and the birds and looking at flowers and looking up at the blue sky, and I was just feeling like, yeah, it's great to be here. But for me, early life was sort of, there was a lot of shame attached with being gay, and I'm still sort of working and trying to dissolve that shame, and so again, one of the having some sort of a spiritual practice is allowing me to do that. And meditation has been one of those things, one of those great tools. Leave it at that.
Yeah, it's interesting because your experience, Eric, as far as what brought you to practice and what brought me to practice are fairly different. I mean, mine has mostly been in the head and very little in the body. And one of the, my profession is I'm a professor, and I have been chair of the department for the last 7 years. That has been a particularly trying. I love being a professor. I love talking about meteorology. I do not particularly like dealing with all the minutiae of running a department, especially when budget cuts are happening. And I find that I have to, for lack of a better word, I think the word manipulate is, it's not really, it's morally neutral as far as I can tell, is to handle, and is to shepherd people try to get them to do what needs to be done. And that requires a lot more patience than I have been able to do at times. So the idea of right speech is very prominent in my mind, especially not only in professional relationships, but certainly in personal relationships. Is one area where I really have to. I see my big gaps in my practice. But going back to what Eric was saying about yoga and using the body as a way of getting here, one of the most useful things that I've been getting lately is the idea of mindful in the whole general area of mindfulness. The idea of as impatience and anger or wrong words or unskillful words arise, just as that idea comes, I can report that maybe 10% of the time, but certainly not the majority of the time, but I've been able to get into the body and see what's happening and where I feel the anger or the impatience begins to arise. It's right here in my upper belly, and if I can just pay attention to that while it's happening, occasionally I'm able to just, I guess it's the equivalent to counting to 10, breathing deep. But that is one of those areas that I certainly have benefited from lately, although not enough. As far as my daily practice is concerned, well, it's not daily. It doesn't happen every day. It happens certainly here every week, every opportunity I come I come here. If I'm in town, I'm here. And this is great. The sangha is a wonderful group of people. And when you think about it, I think we hear that here a lot, but how lucky we are to have a group of people of this size to show up every week, and of gay men that you can trust, of brothers. We're incredibly lucky, and I've had the opportunity to go back to Cuba a few times in recent years. And when you hear about what's going on everywhere else, had I stayed in Cuba, or people like me that stayed behind in Cuba, had a totally different experience of life and way harder than ours. There was a time back in the early 60s when gay people were put in re-education camps, so that's what people my age would have felt like. And now Cuba, of course, at the moment, has evolved way beyond that point, but it's still a very difficult existence over there. So that's I do have a pretty strong sense of gratitude about being here, being in good health, being in San Francisco. Walking over and watching the carnival thing taking place, and we have a wonderful place to be in. I'm very happy to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's like the Dharma talks that occur here to me have been just terrific, and so they've been it's a real gift to be able to talk about psychological things or emotional things or spiritual things. And so I've I really appreciate the work that happens here at the sangha. I just wanted to sort of mention too that one of the things that I work on is my own personal resiliency, and it's like how do I find right speech? How do I create that pause before I sort of open my mouth and say something that's inappropriate? And that inner resiliency to sort of continue to do the work that I've been doing, which is primarily environmental related. And I consider myself to be a student of permaculture, and that is sort of really how do we sort of design our way out of the mess we've made for ourselves. And so part of it for me is being able to slow down, to be able to recharge the batteries, to be able to continue to speak up when it feels awkward to speak up and to speak out. And so that's part of what I get from being here is to find that inner strength, that inner resiliency to continue to do what I choose to do. So it's taken me in lots of different areas of study. I think we heard last week, and it's something that I mention all the time, that that's something that Joanna Macy talks about, in that we were called on to help do hospice care on the culture that we're trying to get away from right now, this destructive sort of hostile culture to the planet and to one another. And we're trying to do midwife on the new culture that we want to bring into existence. And I really like that sort of twofold process that she talks about, and that I think Larry mentioned last week, which really was terrific. So that seems to be what I'm about these days, and I do a variety of work professionally, but my calling right now is to sort of do this bigger work of permaculture. And I leave here, I go over to the Hayes Valley Farm, I do some volunteer work over at this urban agriculture demonstration project, and sometimes haul wheelbarrows of compost, and other times just talk and visit with people and ask questions and learn what they're doing. So that's kind of where I'm at. It's hard to sort of, at times, sort of explain what I do, but then again, I usually can do a reasonable job when I begin to talk about it. So
I like that expression, hospice care for the culture that's dying. That triggered my thoughts on what is it that I'm doing or want to do or can contribute to. By virtue of my life experience, I've been able to be in many situations where I am simultaneously in two clashing ways of being gay and being Cuban, being a liberal Democrat, being Cuban, and the opportunity that I've had lately in the last few years professionally to go back to Cuba and talk to meteorologists for, that's how I got to be invited over there. But I'm old enough I left at an age where I remember a lot of details about Havana, and going back to the same places that I was that I grew up in, hearing people with my own accent, and at the same time being totally familiar with the place, being totally alien to the place at the same time. But you can view that as an opportunity to bridge the gap, and I'm certainly doing everything I can to put to rest that all the divisions that are possible for me to do within the Cuban aspects. But one of the other things that I feel a responsibility to is to certainly through the medium of the internet, is to bring some of these ideas to people like me that speak Spanish, that are isolated in places throughout Latin America. And so that's one area that I would like to be of help with. I certainly would like to live to see the day when things begin to be reconciled in the Cuban community. And and certainly in the environmental area, as a professor of meteorology, we're front and center in the business of global climate change. And that's a very interesting and important aspect of what we need to do. We meteorologists tend to have grown up as weather nerds, not certainly not being good communicators, and yet we are now front and center in the politics of global climate change. One area that I can affect, of course, is the students that I get to see and talk to and influence. But and last week's speaker was particularly useful for me to hear. I asked him a question about, how do you deal in the realm of politics? And he gave a very good answer. I'm so glad that it's now on the web that I was able to listen to it again. But he said showing up, listening carefully, which is something that's really important, and to what's behind the opposite, the idea of the person that's opposing your ideas, and what's the emotional tone of that. That's really important. Speaking the truth, because you have to be able to say what you believe in and effectively. The other one he said was about not being attached to the outcome, because much of the time what you expect, or almost all the time, what you expect to happen doesn't happen, but other things happen that might open the door for other things down the chain. So that is a challenge that I would like to pursue.
Well, I have a Cuba story also, which is that I forget exactly when, but they were embargoed. And they continue to be embargoed by the United States, and which maybe in some ways has been really good for Cuba, because they've had to be very resourceful people. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, basically the Cuba's energy structure was sort of collapsed as well. And they've had to respond. They've had to sort of innovate and be very clever. And so Cuba is actually the state of the art, as far as I'm concerned, in urban agriculture. And they're also probably the only country on the planet that lives within its carbon footprint, given its population and given the resources that it uses. It's like right there in that dead center spot. And so they're a really excellent example of how to respond to these things. So that being said, I also have a sister-in-law who's from Cuba.
Oh, really?
So I was born there. So, but she's down in the Miami part of the family. So, doing environmental work is sort of like you're faced with, you look at the structures that we have. How can we change them? Are they helping? Are they harming? And so those are the sorts of bigger questions. And so I spend a fair amount of time trying to understand systems. I try to understand where the pressure points are, where those places of aikido where you can sort of push and slightly pull or whatever to cause change. It's one of my heroes is Bucky Fuller, and he talked about finding the trim tabs. Finding these trim tabs where the rudder on the rudder itself that would help the large rudder move, and so the rudder would have this sort of slight bent to it that would cause it to turn to move this huge ship of tank or whatever, and so that was the trim tab. And another thing that Bucky was very much a part of, or very much talked about, was the idea of being the generalist. And that we needed to be less cloistered in sort of particular points of view, but we needed to spread our knowledge around and our training and our expertise, so that that we could fit in different places, and so that has actually, it's been something that I've been doing. I very much consider myself to be a generalist, but our society sort of recognizes, niches and wants you to sort of occupy that niche and get really, really good at it and become expert at it, and you'll be rewarded as such, but that some of the problems that we need really require sort of a broader, more generalist perspective on things. And so that, for me personally, has been a struggle because I haven't actually pursued one career and gotten really good at it. I tend to sort of do something for several years and then decide to do something else. And I've done that a number of times. And sometimes it's a little... you feel ungrounded and you feel unsure of yourself, and but then I stick with it, and usually it works out for me. So.
Well, I have I'm sure some of that is that kind of insecurity, if you want to call it that way. They talk about people on their deathbed, and then they usually say, I wish I had spent more time with my family or whatever. Actually, I wish I had spent more time at the office and done more of the focused work myself. One comment, and possibly final comment, because we're probably going to be, I'd like to hear, maybe have a conversation back and forth. But regarding the dedication of merit at the end of this, and it's. I view it not just as a ritual that we do, but I do get to see occasionally. One never knows what the merit of one's action ends up being, and I have a window into that a lot more as a professor, because occasionally people come to me, often people I wouldn't recognize, and say things. So there was one case in point after the Katrina hurricane hit New Orleans, but that was back in 2005, I think it was. I had somebody walk up to me. I was having coffee at a cafe in town, and he said, "You don't recognize it, but I took your class, one of the classes that I teach, the non-majors classes about weather hazards, and of course, the possibility of New Orleans being hit and inundated by a big hurricane is something that people have known for a long time. So I talked about that regularly in that class, and he said, I remember, you told us about that. So who knows how many people that, through informal or, just brief encounters, we affect other people that cascade down the line. So I think it is there's very real merit in that dedication. But should we, any questions from anybody? Are we...
I'm sort of curious as to your relationship, your current relationship with your family, and if you have a relationship with them, and how it might have been affected by your being gay and your around with your family and that sort of stuff.
Well, my parents are gone, and now I have two sisters. I'm out to everybody in the family. And it's pretty good. I mean, it's the people of my parents' generation. There's only three left. Two aunts and one uncle. They're very loving and love to hear from me all the time. Some of them are in Miami, some of them in New Jersey. So no, it's fine. Even the right wingers, I have they put everything aside in that regard. So personally,
well, do you spend time with them, or do you have an active?
Very little. I'm off to New Jersey on Tuesday, and I'll be seeing my sisters and my aunt. Yeah, so twice a year, that kind of.
I was just going to say, I like that you guys traded back and forth. I think that's a great formative thing. I think most of us aren't very good monologists, and it helps to kind of rest and respond. And it's also great to hear climate change. I often feel like in political circles you can't talk about spirituality, and in spiritual circles you can't talk about politics. And I think, permaculture is one of the things that could possibly save our asses. And I also like that there is see at least some integration of those things. So thanks for that.
Eric, I was wondering about this, the hospice for the dying culture. And how does that look to you as opposed to perhaps the impulse for euthanasia or
well, I've actually recently sort of been reading Derek Jensen's books, and he really would be in the euthanasia camp, and so it really is a continuum of how, like, do we fully participate in the system that we have right now, or do we begin to sort of withdraw our support from it? And we can gently withdraw our support from it, and it can be in a variety of different ways. A very simple thing to do is to not bank with the big four or the big seven or whatever they are. So that's one simple way. And there's various people that study the economic systems and how to unplug from that. And so that's one sort of gentle way of sort of unplugging. And then it goes to the other end, which is active resistance. And then that can be taking up arms, or it can be protests. It can be grabbing that hand of sand and throwing it into the works to slow things down. I actually think that the system that we have and that we're living under right now is so it's very much at its last on its last breath, I feel. And we're seeing the austerity now, and we're also seeing the surveillance, right? We're seeing more of the police state. We're seeing how nicely that it fits in with the austerity measures, and we're seeing more and more of that. And so these are in many respects the last gasps. And so I think that the thing to do is to be prepared personally, as a community and as a society. How can we prepare? And so those are the bigger questions.
Let me add something to that, because contrasting Cuba with the U.S., it's a place of great contradictions. They're very advanced in some areas, but that system is also coming to an end. The socialist system is that's practice over there. They're in the process of laying off 500,000 people in a country of 11 million. So that system is not working. It doesn't seem like any system is working well anywhere right now. And that's one of those things that's really frightening in a very real way, because if there were an alternative model to follow that would be very clear, it would be wonderful. And Eric certainly can speak to that a lot more than me, for sure. But that's something that we need to be as nimble in navigating the rough waters that come up, and what we're doing over here is certainly useful, because it helps us be stronger to deal with what comes up.
I just want to say I appreciate how each of you apply Buddhist principles to both your personal lives, taking time to slow down and be conscious of speech, and make more conscious decisions some of the time, and also how you apply Buddhist principles to your work and everyday life as you have to do what you do, teaching or clinical culture or whatever. To me, that's what's interesting to me about this time I live in, and this group in particular, is that we take these ideas and these principles, right speech and paying attention and meditation, but then applying them in everyday situations, both personally and socially.
I sort of wanted to. I like in being in being asked to sort of speak here. My fantasy life says that I'm going to go study Buddhism. I'm going to come back and I'm going to teach you a whole bunch of things you haven't heard before. Which I completely dropped at the very beginning because there's no way. And I was hoping to get to the bookstore and look for Buddhism for Dummies. I don't know if it's in print or if it's an actual title of a book. Is it? It is. Okay. How many people? Okay. But I actually started to think, okay, what is the interface between Buddhism and Native American thought? And so if any of you have any thoughts on that, I would be interested in, or if there is somebody who studied those two places and can sort of talk about that. And that's what I think is really interesting, is when we do study something deeply, then we can sort of discover how it interfaces other deep culture. And that, to me, is fascinating stuff. So.
One aspect of working with the body in meditation that I recently discovered, Mediconnection, is like, oh, this is real meditation. Swimming laps in a pool. It's you're exercising, you're surrounded by blue water. There's no other sounds other than the sound of your breathing going in and out, and I can lose myself while being aware, but with that's, to me, probably the most effective way of meditating whenever I have access to swimming in a pool. I'm not aware of having read anything about it, but hey, if you have access to a pool, it might be an interesting way of sitting. Well, swimming.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any announcements?
Yes, I just want to remind everyone, we have an account at the Community Thrift Center at 623 Valencia Street at 18. It's that various shades of Pepto-Bismol pink. They take donations from 10 to 5 every day, and I would suggest you consult their website because it's a whole list of things that you might think they would want, but they don't. But it's a great way to support the sangha. We've been making an average of about $300 a quarter, so that's been pretty nifty. Keep that up, that would be great.
So today we are going to be mailing our bi-monthly newsletter out to both our members, but about half the people that receive it are in prison. And so it's like their one opportunity to connect with Buddhism and our opportunity to reach out to them. So, but we need about 10 people to volunteer to make it go so we can actually get it out. So could I see a show of hands of anyone who can stick around and fold and staple and stamp? Wonderful. Thank you. We'll gather at about 12:15, 12:20 as the tea and community stuff sort of begins to wane. Thank you.
Art.
Yeah, I'd like to mention that a couple of weeks ago we had a poetry Sunday, which was quite lovely to me, and I know to you. There was a suggestion that we might collect some of this poetry that was given that Sunday to either post on the website or the Yahoo group or even print out to have available. And I've gotten a few of them, but not so many. So I'd just like to remind everybody, if they would like to share their poetry offerings, to either send them to me at harleyshapiro.com, or maybe to hand it or to anybody else if I'm not here. Or others that didn't have poetry that Sunday, but just have some stuff. Some of us thought it might be a nice project for us in the future, just to have a collection of beautiful poetry that inspires us to have in some form. And so that's an offering.
Would you say your website one more time?
Oh, no, it's harleyshapiro.com.
Harley at harleyshapiro.com?
No, just...
That's his
I'm
website.
sorry. What did I say? harleyshapiro@gmail.com.
Sorry.
Or print it out and hand it to me, or whoever is in charge of the song, on an ongoing way. Maybe this will be not just for last Sundays, but just a little project that I think would be lovely.
Well, I have an announcement. As many of you know, I'm a choreographer, and I have a company, and we're performing at your Bruein Center for the Arts, a piece called The Rambler. Just very interesting to hear these guys talk today, which is about, the wanderer, the seeker, basically the peripatetic impulse to roam, to go to the next and the next and the next. And so it's June 10th through the 18th, and I brought some cards. I'll put them out there. Yes, Roy. Yes.
Thank you, gentlemen, once again for a real inspiring talk. And I also loved the change in the format. I really appreciate it when somebody makes it up a little bit and just try something different. I thought it was great. Our speaker next week will be John Misoud.
Can you say a little bit about him?
About John? I've only heard him speak once, and I think he spoke, it was the last quarter of last year. I can tell you one thing, he's a really handsome man with beautiful blue eyes. That's enough, right? Go ahead, Joe. That was your takeaway. I mean, that's what stood out for me. The talk was good, too.
We'll save you a cushion up front.
And Richard, are you our host?
I am.
Oh, you are?
Or no. I'm actually...
I said Richard.
Oh, you have something to say?
Next week I will be facilitating for John.
Oh, okay.
But I'm not hosting.
I am the host today. As usual, there is hot water for tea. We ask you to wash your cup out when you're done and put it on the rack. There's a sign-up sheet over here on the credenza if you want to get our newsletter, and you can get it in electronic form as well as a printed copy. I'm going to be coming around with the Downable, and it's a way we keep the sangha going. There's various things that the sangha supports. So I think the suggested donation is $5 to $8. So whatever you feel moved to give, I'll be happy to take that. And some people go out to lunch and they tend to gather by the door. And I always like to say that some people are shy. You might think about being proactive, maybe inviting somebody to lunch, but that's just a suggestion. And I think that pretty much covers it.
Thank you. Yeah, well.
John Misoud has studied insight meditation for over 9 years and recently completed the East Bay Meditation Center's Commit to Dharma program led by Larry Yang. He's currently in the Community Dharma Leaders Training Program at Spirit Rock. He's a lead facilitator for the EBMC Deep Refuge Affinity Group for Men of Color and their Euro Descent allies. He also studied with Rodney Smith at Seattle Insight Meditation for 8 years. John was also the coordinator of the Seattle Multicultural Sangha and spent 10 years on the leadership team of Seattle Dharma Buddies, a meditation group for LGBT men. So he's more than just beautiful eyes. Okay,
well, let's
By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness, which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity, without too much attachment or too much aversion, and live believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.